Good evening. In a moment, our press preview. I'll look at what's in the morning's newspapers. Let's take you through our top stories first. So, the Foreign Office says that Britons who hold dual nationality with one of the 7 countries affected by Donald Trump's travel ban will be exempt. Protests taking place outside the White House right now and in cities across America against the policy which affects refugees and travellers from 7 mainly Muslim countries. Donald Trump's been talking about that in the last hour or so. And the French Socialist Party has chosen left-wing candidate Benoît Hamon to stand in April's presidential election. So, to our press preview here on Sky News, joining us this evening, the historian Peter Frankopan and the documentary maker and journalist Jenny Kleeman. Welcome both. First, though, let's just remind you what's in the front pages of those papers. We're going to start with the Independent. You can take a look there at what the India's got to say about the dominating story. A damning statement from Somali-born Olympian Sir Mo Farah reacting to the possibility that he might not be able to return to his family in the United States. Same vein, the front of the Star carries a picture of Sir Mo and his family. The FT, at least the early edition, reports Donald Trump is maintaining his defiant stance in the face of criticism from across the globe, really. The clarification from the Foreign Office that Britons with dual nationality won't fall under the US ban prompts the Telegraph to cast Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson as the hero of the piece. He's also a Telegraph columnist, coincidentally. Reassurance given to Britons that they won't be affected by the ban are branded a climb down in the Times. The Metro has word of the online petition to rescind Donald Trump's invitation to enjoy a state visit to the UK. As we report right now, it's received more than 750,000 signatures, 780,000 e-signatures on that petition. The Guardian highlights the pressure mounting on Theresa May over that planned state visit too. And the Express, as it often does actually, striking a different editorial note with a health story. Drug to reverse the effects of Alzheimer's disease, it says, could be available within a matter of years. Peter Frankopan, the documentary maker, and the journalist Jenny Kleeman are here as previously introduced. And we're going to start, I think, with the FT. And apologies to the FT subs, because this is one of the earlier editions. It may have been updated since. What do we make of it?
Well, yes, this is a kind of early take on what's been an interesting day for Trump, which is that more and more people are coming out and saying that they disagree with his executive order, including senior Republican senators like John McCain and Lindsey Graham. They issued a statement saying it would be a self-inflicted wound in the fight against terrorism. You've got people like Mark Zuckerberg. But basically, nobody's really coming out and saying this is a great idea, even though Donald Trump made it very clear that this is what he was going to do, even though nobody really thought he would be able to do it. He is doing it. And it's, you know, as the day has gone on, the story obviously in the UK is about us and how we should be responding to it. And, you know, I find it extremely embarrassing and unedifying, you know, that today Amber Rudd and Boris Johnson were told to speak to their counterparts and protect British interests. This idea being that, you know, as long as British nationals are protected, then that's OK. Where I think part of being British is a sort of tolerance and respect and a sense of fairness in the world. This is certainly not a...
But their first duty is to British nationals, isn't it? Or at least those people who've got dual nationality.
That is their first duty, yes, but I would think that we could see slightly beyond that. And in fact, this was actually quite a good day for Jeremy Corbyn, I think, unusually. I don't say that often. He came out, you know, quite strongly saying that, you know, this goes against the values that we share with America and we shouldn't countenance it. But at the moment, our incredibly sort of weak, pathetic response, I think, is quite embarrassing. It's kind of like, you know, the sad kid in school class who's best friends with the bully and just wants to, you know, keep in favour of the bully and doesn't have the guts to say, you know what, we don't stand for this.
OK. Peter, is this playground politics, or is this somebody simply acting on a mandate that's been handed to him by tens of millions of people?
Well, what I'm shocked by is the fact that it hasn't been thought through. You know, the executive order looks like it was badly drafted. I don't think there was a follow-through of what it would mean or what it would look like in other parts of the world. And it's still an evolving story about what this will actually mean. I mean, we've had an assurance tonight from the Foreign Secretary that it won't mean anything for Britons, but whether that will be translated into airline check-ins when you arrive and you promise that you'll be OK, or individual representatives at airports, whether you'll be when you land in the United States, Who knows? So I think that it looks like the stone was thrown without really thinking about what might happen next.
Should we try and peer into the mind of Donald Trump? I mean, it may be that this was a coup d'etat. He thought this was a way of making a big splash and then letting his critics come on to him. He may feel that works for him. It may be more practical and technical. He may feel that if this was something that was rolled out over a period of weeks or months, then people who wanted to circumvent the system could so do.
Well, in ancient Rome, new emperors knew that they needed to make a splash. And there's no doubt that Trump has been very busy in the first week, and the pressure to look like you're doing lots of things is important. But even in the course of today, there have been suggestions that Pakistan might be added to the list of the countries that have been so far named, the 7. Lots of questions about why Saudi Arabia isn't included, for example, given that that 15 of the 9/11 bombers and the terrorists came from Saudi. And I think we're trying to work through, is his target discriminate or indiscriminate? Is he trying to just get rid of the whole haystack in order to try to catch the one needle? I think it's very hard when you see that, from what I understand from reports in the States, Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense and of Justice weren't involved in drafting or even approving the executive or seeing the executive order before it was passed. I think you can see that sometimes that pressure to act can get the cart to run away with the horse.
Jenny, front of the eye, I mean, it's pictures of Mo Farah you find on several front pages, actually, but it puts a face to the story, doesn't it?
Yes, he made a very eloquent posting on Facebook pointing out, these are the sorts of people who are going to be affected by the ban. And not just...
Not now, though.
Not now. And this has been superseded. But imagine that you are a refugee, like you have been granted refugee status, that you have escaped a war zone, you have gone to another country, you've lived in a refugee camp, and you've been granted refugee status in the United States, and you have that stamp in your passport, and you are on the plane going over to America, and then you get stopped and detained and sent back. It is completely inhuman. But yes, it's important that we have a face to put to all of this, and it is Sir Mo Farah, who, most people with a refugee background are not like him. But anyone who's travelled to the US knows that it's not easy getting into the US, even if you're just going there as a tourist. I had to get a journalist visa a couple of months ago. I'm glad I've got it already. And
it's a day written off at the embassy.
Yes, and yes, you have to sit there and wait, and you have to sit and wait and not complain that you're having to wait for a long time because you would really like to go in there. The borders were tough enough already. And it does seem not well thought through. But the thing about Donald Trump is, before he came into power, there were two schools of thought about him. And one was that, this is all talk and bluster, and actually he's being a caricature of himself. And when he actually has power, he will be somehow a little bit more sedate. He'll have advisors around him. But then, he is this cartoon character of himself. He is who he says he is. He has done everything he says he's going to do. Well, at least he has put things into motion in this first week. It's been massively symbolic. I think we are just going to be kept on our toes by him for a very long time.
But he's choosing the battles, Peter, isn't he? I mean, I was talking to an immigration lawyer earlier. This is going to be the subject of what they call it in America, they call it here too, lawfare, for months, if not years to come. And when it's argued over by the lawyers, the winners, you could argue, will be those Trump supporters who argue that the democratic mandate of the people is ignored, and it's the lawyers who carve the whole thing up. Sure.
I mean, I think what I can add, really, is that the United States has a pretty disjointed reputation around large parts of the world. And although we think that the audience here, like Jenny says, is what it means for Britons and those divisions in the United States, there are other very large populations all over the world who are watching these events unfold in China, in India, in the Middle East, in Africa. And I think that presentation of the United States as turning its back on its tolerances, on the idea that it's becoming a closed society, that it's no longer the place you go to follow your dreams, is something that is in the world of the 21st century. People, I think, are increasingly realising that, well, maybe America's had its time, and this is a new age that we're going into, and maybe openness, tolerances will start to multiply in places that haven't had those typically, because it's a classic sign of societies turning in on themselves when they start to talk about identity, when they start to make exclusions about who's who. But I mean, what I love about Mo Farah's statement is that, we all knew he had a great kick down the home straight, but what a fantastic turn of phrase. It's a wonderful quote. And I would imagine if you spoke to him, he'd still say Trump made him an alien, even if this evening it seems that they're prepared to allow him in after all, to rejoin his family.
It's interesting, Jenny, this idea of how America is viewed by other people. One of our US correspondents was interviewing an Iranian American earlier who said, actually, America's got a really good rep in Iran. Now, there are many parts of the Western world who wouldn't see things that way, but it happens to be true, doesn't it, for instance?
It might be true, but I don't think Donald Trump cares, really. I mean, it's all about America first, America first. He cares about how he's received at home, and he's going to be how he wants to be on the global stage, regardless of how, he's a businessman. He wants to strike deals. A lot of, if you were being uncharitable to him, you could say that perhaps the reason why Saudi Arabia isn't on his list is because he has lots of business interests in Saudi Arabia. He's thinking like a businessman.
There's been an announcement about safe zones. I mean,
yes.
they would argue, actually, that there's a big strategic interest, intelligence sharing partners,
yes, that's always what people say about Saudi Arabia, isn't it? But it is embarrassing, the amount that we're prepared to indulge in Saudi Arabia, not just in terms of their record with producing terrorists, but also their human rights record. But yeah, I mean, I think that I totally get what you're saying. It is this sort of this protectionism, this looking inwards, and also this idea of this pure Americanness. When it is a nation of immigrants, they are, it is a nation of people who were not born there originally. It is the sort of dying throes of a civilization.
Yeah, and that would mean Steve Jobs' father wouldn't have got in. Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google, has been at San Francisco airport protesting, saying that he's a refugee as well. And, I think that this is a world where, in the Syria peace talks going on in Kazakhstan, Iran are there, Turkey are there, Russia are there, China are there, and there's no space for the United States, partly because the US don't want to be involved up front line, and partly because they're not wanted. And this world that we're all very familiar with, of the United States taking the lead, sometimes getting it wrong, sometimes getting it right, acting out of principles, that is obviously changing. And what we're looking through tonight, these protests in the airports, the resistance against Trump, the need for clarification, I think is the wheels of history turning into a new age where the US at the very least is going to play a very different and less benign role in international affairs than it has done for the last century.
The Metro, in a sense, are almost picking up on a story that was more a story of yesterday, but it's also a story that you get the sense will revisit us again and again. This will probably not be the last petition to stop Donald Trump coming to the UK.
I think it's quite brave of them to actually put a figure to it, because when I was coming here, on the journey here, I was looking at this petition, and in the time it took, I don't live that far away from the studios, but 100,000 people had signed the petition in the time it took from me leaving the house to arriving here. So they say that more than 700,000 people have backed the petition. I'm sure it will be 1 million tomorrow. And I'm sure a lot of the people who signed the petition haven't actually read it, because the petition doesn't say don't allow Trump to come. It says Trump shouldn't come here on a state visit because it would embarrass the Queen, because he's been disrespectful about women and it is an embarrassment himself. And there may be some truth to that. But this presentation of it would be wrong to roll out the red carpet as he faces these protests for banning refugees. That's not quite what the protest is about, what the petition is about.
It is easy to be, to look at these, as it leaps up, to look at these e-petitions and say it doesn't necessarily involve a lot of commitment to a political cause to simply click on on your mouse. But if you are at the palace, you're going to be a little bit nervous, aren't you, about this statement?
Well, digital democracy is something we talk about a lot at the moment, about how could people vote and how can they express their opinions. And this elision of the old world, of the royal family, who are very risk-averse, the Queen over Christmas, everyone terrified about her being ill, and now being exposed by, if Trump does come, if those signatories translate into protests on the streets, that looks bad for us, that look all the way around. It's a public relations nightmare waiting to happen. But at the same time, what the digital world does allow people to do is to mobilise quickly and to get protests. And in fact, not just here, but in the States, the people turning up at the airports. I mean, it was extraordinary yesterday evening, seeing JFK being absolutely blocked, the transport authorities trying to get people to stop coming, and the governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, saying people have the right under the Constitution to protest peacefully. The digital world does allow these kind of risks to multiply quickly and mushroom. And if Trump comes, I don't have any doubt that there will be vocal opposition. How big that will be, goodness knows. But I mean, it's a tricky thing to try to get right, because it is important that we have a good relationship with the US. He has been elected. We do need to find a way of treating people civilly. But this looks tough to me.
And the palace will say, well, we've welcomed difficult customers before, from President Ceausescu, I suppose, even through to the Chinese leadership a couple of years ago. We'll talk some more about that in a moment, won't we? Coming up, why being labelled a difficult woman is a badge to wear with pride. OK, resuming our look at tomorrow's papers in the company of the historian Peter Frankopan and the documentary maker and journalist Jenny Kleeman. And I think we're going to start actually with events in France tonight, where it looks like the Socialists have picked a candidate. However electable, we don't know.
It's a kind of poison chalice, really, because, the Socialist Party is not very positively viewed in France at the moment. Hollande has not been a popular president and isn't standing for re-election himself. Everybody's watching these French elections. It's a sort of bellwether of how right-wing is the world going to go in recent events. So, we have a candidate who is Benoît Hamon. And yes, this is a story about the right-wing party putting on a united front to allay fears that that the campaign. Ooh, I'm not reading this properly. The campaign found. Yes, I'm reading this badly. I'm making a fair stab at it. But yes, it's about rallies. The campaign hotting up really, and the right-wing party. The right-wing parties, are the ones to watch in the French election.
Yeah, people. I remember back in 2002, wasn't it? Le Pen made the run-off then.
Yes.
Against Jacques Chirac, wasn't it? And we seem to have forgotten that actually the Front National have sort of been here before.
Yes.
Actually.
Yes, it's not unprecedented. It's not unprecedented that the fact that they have a realistic stab at power.
He wants, amongst other things, to have a universal income for everybody, regardless of whether a billionaire or a pauper. He wants to legalise cannabis. He's offering something new. You could argue.
Yes, well, I'm sort of slightly mystified. Where have all the good politicians gone? Because Hamon is a bit like Jeremy Corbyn. He's got lots of ideas, whether they are practical ones.
Do we not want politicians to have ideas, Peter?
I think we do. I think ideally, so Hamon wants to add 500 billion to the French national debt, which is what his policies would do.
32-hour working week.
Which is, substantial. So it looks like revolution, but through the ballot box. And what's difficult is that it's hard to give a great deal of credibility to these very radical ideas because they involve throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And Hamon, as Jenny said, the socialists are very poorly regarded right now. But where do you go? If you don't want the Front National, you've got a choice of voting for the socialists. You've got Macron, who's sort of sitting in the middle, Fillon, whose wife has been Welsh-born wife, when he was prime minister, looked like it was almost certain that she would be the next first lady of France. Fillon's campaign this evening looks like it's in tatters, and it's very hard to see. A bit like here, a bit like in many of the Western democracies, who is it who's going to walk in from the wings and take over the kingdom now Hamlet's dead? And I think that lack of a credible, sensible centrist who's able to appeal to both sides of the divides is very worrying for people who, whatever your opinions on the left or the right, or whatever your views are about Brexit, someone who's able to communicate to bring people together. And it's an unenviable task, but I can't see anybody doing that in France any more than in many of the other countries in Europe and in the States right now.
We can just lighten the editorial diet a little bit. Did either of you watch the Australian Open final?
I didn't see it live, but you saw it.
Yes. Well, I felt like I was 10 years ago, before the banking crisis, before Brexit, when the world seemed to be a happier place. Seeing these two titans square off. I mean, it was a dream final and
won by
spectacular
Federer,
tennis.
age 35.
Age 35. So there's still hope, Colin, for you and I to maybe the men's doubles
table
veterans.
tennis, Peter, perhaps.
Well, I'll settle for that. But it was a fantastic match, and it went to 5 sets, which is any tennis fan knows that's the dream. And Nadal had a break-up, and Federer came back. And I mean, they've still got it. These guys. I don't know what they're drinking, what they're eating, how they're being massaged. But I mean, they're running around for 4 or 5 hours at a time. And the standard was incredible. It's a fairy tale for Roger to come back 2 sets of twins and to win an 18th title, age 35, in Australia. He's the first man to win 3 Grand Slams 5 times, which is something which is extraordinary.
And also he was just so gracious about it, and in his post-match
He's impossibly
interview.
gracious.
Yes, and he
really?
said, if only, there's no draws in tennis. If there could have been a draw, I would have wished there would have been a draw with Nadal. You don't get much of that really in sport, do you? And yeah,
helps if you win a lot.
Yes, it's easy to be gracious and magnanimous if you win.
He is a good winner, and in fact, the tennis lot, by and large, they are good winners and good losers. I guess because they have to do it all the time, whereas footballers, you play once a week, and Anyway, but it's great for Federer.
We've got about 30 seconds left. I think one of you has picked Lucy Kellaway at the top of the FT.
And actually, it's not me. You'd think it was me that picked this story, but no, it was Paul.
Yeah, strong women is a badge to wear with pride. That's the Ken Clark quote about Theresa May.
On this news channel.
Yes.
On this news channel.
And he didn't know that he was being
We'll gloss over
naughty
that,
people.
Jenny, if you could.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, well, a difficult woman, I thought that's just code for just woman, isn't it, for a lot of men? That
Oh, you are trending
women
in.
being difficult. I don't know what that means. That means someone who's got ideas that you need to, that threaten and challenge you. So I don't know what Lucy will have written about, but I think it's absolutely right to wear a badge with pride. Being sort of a pussycat sitting in the corner waiting.
I don't think
for...
anyone wants to be an easy woman. I don't think that's a badge that you would wear with pride. But yes, being a woman who stands up for yourself is certainly a badge.
Yeah,
I hope it is.
Yeah, and a shout out, I think, to Theresa May that it's an unenviable job that she has right now. It is difficult, and not many friends any which way she looks. So difficult
She
women
really
have it
wanted
tough.
it, though. I mean,
Peter,
she knew
Jenny,
what she
I
was
salute
letting
both of
herself
you.
in
You've made a chat out of an 8-word headline. We'll know more in the next hour when we get the inside pages, won't we? God willing. Let's see what the weather's got in store now.